Hello and welcome to the Scaling Done Right podcast. This is episode number 6 and my name is Gerion Hermkes. Today we are going to talk a little bit about resistance when doing agile transformations. So whenever you change something, and it doesn't even have to do with agile, you will usually encounter resistance. And it doesn't even have to be in other people. Even if you change your fitness regimen, right, your diet, you are going to encounter resistance. And if you're a good coach, you will actually try to avoid that resistance as much as possible. You don't want to be the agile idiot that goes in and unnecessarily creates resistance by just, pissing everybody off and just making everybody mad for no reason, right? But at the same time, the opposite is also kind of true, meaning your job, especially as an agile coach, if you're helping somebody along a transformation, or if you are just a member of that transformation, you're a manager or whatever, your whole reason for being there is actually to deal with the resistance, I almost said to suffer through it. That's kind of putting it a bit harshly, but actually to participate in it and take it in, because the resistance is telling you that you're actually changing something, that actually something is happening. So it's something that you don't want to unnecessarily create, but it's also not something, but the thing that you have to work with. And so the title of the chapter is Pioneers Take All the Arrows. And so we want to get a little bit more into that resistance and how you might create it yourself and where it comes from. Before we go into that, we just want to make you aware of one problem that we often see when scaling, and that is premature scaling. So we have already talked in the beginning about inadvertent scaling, meaning you start scaling because Scrum is working good on the team level, and you add more teams, and suddenly you're in a world of pain. Right now, what we mean by premature scaling is that people usually start adding teams before properly investing into the teams they already have. And this is sometimes hard for people to understand because they set up a team, they do okay Scrum, maybe not even, and it still kind of works. It's faster than what they have done before. The members of the team will be more content. And so it looks like they're doing Scrum and everything is going well. The subtitle of Dr. Sutherland's Scrum book, the so-called Red Book, is Twice the Work in Half the Time. And whenever I ask people, I often get the feedback that this is a little bit too salesy, it's a little bit exaggerating. But the truth of the matter is that that's a joke, in the sense that twice the work in half the time, that's only if you don't do it very well. If you have ever properly implemented Scrum, if you have ever had a team that was really high performing, that was just humming along, twice the work in half the time is easy. And right now, what you might be feeling when I say this is resistance, the very topic that we want to talk about, because if you say something like this, people will have resistance to it. And it's your job as a coach, for example, to notice that and work around it. Right now, I just want to focus on a specific part of this. Let's assume that the statement I just made that might have created that resistance in you, that this is true. That you can actually increase the productivity, the velocity of the team by a factor of 5 or 10. What people now do is they increase the velocity of the team by adopting Scrum by, let's say, 20-30%, which is gigantic. That's awesome. And then they'll say, well, this is all the team can do. That's all the team can handle. Let's add another team. So they're starting to scale. What we're saying is, as scaling experts, we're saying, don't scale. Please don't scale. Please get that team not to 20-30% increase in velocity. Get it to 200, 500 first before you actually start adding teams. And that is very important because a team is associated with a cost, right? So having a team room is going to cost a lot of money. And the more teams you have, the more money it's going to cost you. And instead of spending that money on additional teams, please spend some of that money on making the work of that original team better. That might mean high salaries. That might mean better qualified employees. That might mean a test environment where there was none before. That might mean computers that actually work. That might mean an air conditioning so you can actually work through the summers and not reduce your velocity during the summer by 20%, right? So even we as scaling expert, we're saying, please don't scale. Please make sure that your Scrum is not only good, as we said in the beginning of the podcast, but is actually exceedingly high, because otherwise the return on investment is not going to be there for you. The other thing that, when we come back to that topic of resistance, the other thing that we like to use in Scrum at Scale is the so-called reference model. So instead of maybe changing 200 teams at once, and we hear these stories all the time, right? So we switched to Scrum with all 200 teams at once, or we switched our scaling framework with dozens of teams at once. What's going to happen? You're going to come to a standstill. Business operations is going to be affected, and you're going to be in a world of pain. So instead of that, please use the reference model. And it's a fancy term for a very simple concept. Just use 2, maybe 3 teams. I always use 2. Use 2 teams and have them go first, right? It's kind of like the scouts in the military. You let somebody go ahead a little bit to find out what's actually going on, to see what we can expect as far as resistance, problems, etc. And this is very practical and very easy. So instead of going into a transformation and switching all teams at once, just start with 2. And it often makes sense for the coach, or one of the coaches, to assume the role of the Scrum Master in the team. Because then you can be very close and actually help them along. What we are trying to get out of that is actually 3 separate things. The first one is we want to have early wins. So if those teams start to work with Scrum or Scrum at Scale, and we can demonstrate some benefits, then this will lower resistance overall, especially with management. And we can make our case that, well, see, this is just 2 teams. Imagine we have all 200 working like that. What would be possible, right? So this is a way to get quick wins in order to increase the likelihood that we can actually continue and make the whole transformation larger. Secondly, we want to be role models, right? We want to have teams that are functioning at the highest level. We don't want to have Scrum, but we don't want to have teams that are just a little bit better than a waterfall team. We want to have very high-performing teams that everybody can take as a role model, can orient themselves to, and can try to mimic. And lastly, we want to remove organizational impediments. So if you know Scrum, you know that a part of the role of the Scrum Master is to remove impediments, things that impede or slow down the teams. Some of these are very practical. We don't have a printer. The internet is flaky. It's too hot in here. I can't work. A team member is always coming late, etc., etc. So it's very practical. But some of these are driven by policies of the corporation. So it might be that you have an HR policy that used to make sense 20 years ago, but that now is actually hindering the whole company. Because you need, for example, a specific skill that costs a little bit more, and you can't get that skill because there's an upper limit to salaries, for example. And that makes sense if you just look at their past historic context. But now it means that your team is losing because your competitor doesn't have that problem, and they just overtake you, and they just run away, and you can't keep up with them. And so the idea behind the reference team, behind these scouts, is to have 2 teams run into these organizational impediments, right? If you have an impediment that is affecting the whole organization, why would you want to have this hurt all of the 200 teams? Let just 2 teams run into it, feel the pain, change those organizational impediments, and then have the other 198 teams be able to just coast through so they don't have to go through the pain. And this is a very powerful tool to reduce the stress, the resistance in the organization. The other thing that is really important from our view is how you go about implementing Scrum. So Scrum coaches of the first generations often were, I don't want to say often, but some of them were very harsh. I met some of them and it was really a pain to work with them. They were really convinced of Scrum, so are we, but the way they went about communicating that was just creating resistance everywhere. So we have the term Scrum Nazi, so please don't go into a company as a coach and say, oh, you guys are idiots, you don't know how to do Scrum properly, and this is not the way to do it, and you're not the smartest guy here because you're not doing this right, and this is bad Scrum, blah, 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 blah. It's just creating unnecessary resistance. We have the goal in mind that we want to have very high level Scrum, and we're not gonna negotiate on that. The goal is, for me, is always to have an exceedingly high level of Scrum. But what we are trying to do is change how we implement that. And that is not by telling people that they are wrong or that they are stupid, but by meeting them where they are. Meeting them where they are and helping them on that track. We never get complacent about it because we still kind of need to reach that dream goal of having really high level Scrum. But we also don't let that stress us and lead us to not communicate appropriately with the people in that transformation. Lastly, another topic that often creates resistance in transformations is thinking about who you're talking to inside an organization when you're talking about Scrum. I've seen it so many times that coaches come in, experienced Scrum coaches. They come into an organization and they talk to management and they tell the management, well, yeah, this is really good. If we do these changes, it's going to be much more sustainable for the workers and the quality is going to be a little bit better, and we won't have those death marches anymore where shortly before a deadline, the developers have to work through the night. The problem with that is that this isn't really what the managers care about. I'm not saying they're bad people. I'm not saying they don't honestly concern themselves with the well-being of their employees. Most of them do, absolutely. But this is not what they need from you as an agile coach, especially not if you are touching management, if you are in an enterprise function. So what we propose you do is you segment your audience as any good marketer would and talk differently to different parts of the hierarchy. So if you are talking to employees, to team members, talking about the survivability of the company does not really resonate. They don't care. They care about stuff like, I'm doing overtime all the time. I'm here 60, 70 hours a week, yet nothing ever gets done. The quality of product that we deliver is very bad. And actually, we don't really deliver it. Or we deliver it and then have to go to the customer for half a year and fix it there. And it kind of almost feels like they're trying to set us up. It almost feels like the system is rigged in a way that I, as an individual contributor, can't really succeed here. Now, if you talk to top management and address those concerns, it's not going to work. The top management has a completely different set of problems. For example, they need to make sure that the company survives. Nothing could be worse than the company failing under their command or failing shortly after they have left the company. And what is important to understand here is that top managers live in a little bit of a different world. That's kind of like an obvious statement, but it's important to understand how it is different. It is different in the sense that they constantly have to make promises to a very important stakeholders. Those stakeholders could be business analysts, like stock market analysts. It could be the Workers' Council. It could be politicians. It could be allied companies. It could be the board. And so they have to make promises to them. And if they don't keep them, they lose their face. Because the next time, if the CEO promises something and it's not getting done by the time it was promised to be done, next time the board is not going to put all that much faith in it. And the third time, they will already know that the CEO will not deliver as promised. And that's basically the end of the story for the CEO. So the CEO, if you want to talk to that person, a CEO, a top manager, you have to talk about delivering reliably so that he or she can keep his or her promises, right? And you have to talk about the survivability of the company. If you talk about sustainable working environments, that might be very important to that individual, but it's not what's keeping her up at night, because she has to pay for her own mortgage, right? And she can't do that if she doesn't deliver on a promise to the board again. So this whole chapter is about, and the book goes more into detail, but this whole chapter is about resistance and some potential sources and some ways to mitigate this. If you're interested to dig deeper, please pick up the book, Scaling Done Right. You can find it wherever you usually buy books. If you need help in your transformation, be it through mentoring, coaching, or training, for example, in Scrum or Scrum at Scale, please reach out to me, Gary On, at teamflow.net, or to lewis@raskere.com, raskere.com. Thank you for listening, and see you in one of the future episodes.